Josh lazily raised an arm, blocking the first blow with an almost bored ease. His movements were fluid, almost instinctual, as he sidestepped the next attack. The young Xantian, eager and predictable, followed through with a high kick that sliced through empty air. Josh didn't even blink. Instead, he extended his foot just enough to trip his opponent, sending the six-legged warrior tumbling to the ground in a heap of limbs and frustration. The room fell silent, save for the soft, rhythmic breathing of the Chandur overseer, who sat cross-legged at the edge of the sparring mat, his feline eyes gleaming with amusement. "Human Josh wins again," the Chandur announced, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Show respect." The Xantian scrambled to his feet, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking softly as he performed a complex, six-legged curtsy. Josh, ever the picture of casual grace, returned the gesture with a simple bow, his eyes never leaving his opponent. "Youngling," the Chandur began, his tone shifting to one of mild reproach. "Why did you fail?" The Xantian's voice was a whine, high-pitched and tinged with frustration. "We do not know, venerable one. We paced our strikes in accordance with the teachings. We performed each motion as trained. We should not have failed. This human Josh must be—" "Venerable one," Josh interrupted smoothly, his voice cutting through the Xantian's accusation like a blade. He knew where this was going, and he wasn't about to let the young hothead accuse him of cheating. "Not today. My opponent failed because he paced himself according to the teachings and moved in accordance with his training." The Chandur's ears twitched, a sign of curiosity. "Can you expand on that?" Josh glanced at the Xantian, who was now fuming, his exoskeleton flushing a deep purple. "In simple terms," Josh said, his voice calm but firm, "I knew what he was going to do before he did it. I knew where every blow was aimed, when every kick would come, and how he would rush at me. He didn't expect the unexpected." The Chandur nodded slowly, his gaze shifting between Josh and his protege. "Very well," he said after a moment. "Remain here, Josh, while my young protege attends to his other duties." The Xantian scurried out of the room, his movements jerky with barely contained anger. Josh watched him go, then turned his attention back to the Chandur. The large, cat-like being was an imposing figure, his 6 limbs folded neatly beneath him, his fur a sleek, dark gray that shimmered in the dim light. His eyes, however, were what always caught Josh's attention. They were sharp, intelligent, and carried a hint of humor that was almost human. "My young and rash protege was about to accuse you of cheating, friend Josh," the Chandur said once they were alone. "I know, venerable one," Josh replied, his tone respectful but not overly formal. "Not so venerable when it is just the two of us," the Chandur said with a soft chuckle. "You were quick to interrupt him." "As you wish, my nameless friend," Josh said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yes, I had to be." "Why, friend Josh?" "Because if I hadn't, there would have been a fight. And not the kind that ends with a curtsy and a bow. It would have been a fight until one of us yielded or died." The Chandur's ears twitched again, this time in amusement. "Most think humans are quick and eager to fight." "We can be," Josh admitted, leaning back slightly. "But fight for what benefit?" He wouldn't have yielded. "That means the only outcome would be you losing your current benefactor. And honestly, my friend, I couldn't have that on my conscience. Not on top of everything else." "This is true, friend Josh," the Chandur said, his voice softening. "My current arrangements suit me, even if my young protege is quick to anger and slow to learn." Josh nodded and followed the Chandur into the adjoining kitchen. The room was small but cozy, with shelves lined with various herbs and spices that filled the air with a warm, earthy scent. The Chandur moved with a grace that belied his size, his 6 limbs working in perfect harmony as he prepared the tea. Josh watched in silence, his mind wandering as he waited for the steaming cups to be placed on the table. "2 sugars, please," Josh said as the Chandur handed him his cup. He stirred the tea slowly, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. "So, the arrangement suits you?" "Verily it does, friend Josh," the Chandur replied, his voice carrying a note of contentment. Although I am puzzled. Verily indeed, Josh said with a faint smile. I saw how our young hothead's mother looked at you as she guided me to the dojo earlier. The Chundur's ears flattened slightly, and he looked away, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his tea. Who can blame her? He said after a moment. It is known that her husband fell in the war, although his body was never recovered. Like your clan, Josh said quietly. A friend of mine was there. There was never a body left to recover. Like my clan, the Chandur agreed, his voice tinged with sorrow. And like my name. So I am still puzzled, friend Josh. Why are you doing this? Even for a human it was unexpected. Josh stared into his tea for a long time, the steam curling around his face as he gathered his thoughts. Because I think, he said finally. I both can, and must. He looked up at the Chandur, his expression serious. I didn't haul your broken body to the medics just to keep you alive. I didn't teach you to meditate on the POW ship just to keep you quiet. And you didn't encourage me to find a sensei willing to work with a non-human just to teach me how to fight. The Chandur added, his tone light but probing. Josh smiled faintly and looked back into his tea. More to learn when not to fight, my nameless friend. But that doesn't explain why you worked so hard to arrange. Well, all this, the Chandur said, gesturing vaguely to the dojo and the life they now shared. Our people were enemies. There was war between us. Humans are quick and eager to fight, you said, Josh replied, his voice steady. Perhaps we should be more eager to make friends. He shook his head and drained his cup before continuing. We were enemies. There was a war. But there is no war now, and in the future our people might be friends. I would like that to happen sooner. Besides, he added with a small smirk, it's nice to do unexpected things. The Chundur's ears twitched again, and he let out a soft, rumbling laugh. I see. I think I see. More tea, friend Josh. Josh shook his head as he stood up. Not today, my nameless friend. I've got 2 more friends from the war to check up on. And if I'm not mistaken, your protégé's mother will likely discuss her son's progress with you later. And perhaps other things too. The Chundur's ears flattened once more, and he looked away, his expression unreadable. I do not expect her to, but perhaps I should. You should, Josh said, his tone firm but kind. Until next week, my nameless friend. Until next week, friend Josh, the Chandur replied, his voice carrying a note of gratitude. As Josh left the dojo, the weight of the past and the possibilities of the future hung heavy in the air. The war had left scars on both their peoples, but in the quiet moments shared over tea and sparring matches, there was a glimmer of hope, a hope that one day, the unexpected might become the norm, and enemies might become friends. Josh stepped out of the dojo, the cool evening air brushing against his face. The streets of the Xantian colony were quiet, the faint hum of distant machinery the only sound breaking the silence. He adjusted the strap of his bag and began walking, his mind still lingering on the conversation with the Chandur. The war had ended, but its shadows still loomed large, and Josh couldn't shake the feeling that something was stirring beneath the surface. As he turned a corner, a faint rustling sound caught his attention. He paused, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of the blade hidden beneath his coat. The streets were empty, but his instinct screamed that he wasn't alone. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes scanning the shadows. Show yourself, he said, his voice calm but firm. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a figure emerged from the darkness. A Xantian, but not the young hothead from the dojo. This one was older, his exoskeleton scarred and weathered, his movements deliberate and calculated. Josh recognized him immediately. General Kral, a former war commander who had disappeared after the armistice. Human Josh, Kral said, his voice a low, guttural growl. I've been waiting for you. Josh's grip tightened on his blade, but he didn't draw it. General Kral, he replied, keeping his tone neutral. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you'd retired. Kral's mandibles clicked softly, a sound that might have been laughter. Retired? No, human. I've been busy. Watching. waiting, planning. Josh's mind raced. Kral had been a formidable opponent during the war, known for his ruthless tactics and unyielding loyalty to the Xantian cause. If he was here now, it could only mean trouble. "What do you want, Kral?" Josh asked, his voice steady. Kral took a step closer, his 6 legs moving with a predatory grace. "I want what was taken from us. I want justice. And I want you to stay out of my way." Josh's eyes narrowed. "The war is over, Kral. There's no need for this." "The war is never over," Kral snapped, his voice rising. "Not while traitors like you walk free, consorting with our enemies, undermining everything we fought for." Josh took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "I'm not your enemy, Kral. But if you're looking for a fight, you'll find one." Kral's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "Oh, I'm counting on it." Before Josh could react, Kral lunged, his movements blindingly fast. Josh barely had time to draw his blade and block the attack, the force of the impact sending him stumbling back. Kral pressed the advantage, his strikes coming in a flurry of blows that forced Josh to retreat. But Josh wasn't defenseless. He had spent years honing his skills, learning to anticipate his opponent's moves. He dodged and parried, his movements precise and calculated. Yet Kral was no ordinary opponent. He was a seasoned warrior, and he fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. The clash of their blades echoed through the empty streets, the sound drawing the attention of a few curious onlookers who quickly scattered when they realized what was happening. Josh knew he couldn't keep this up forever. He needed to end this, and fast. With a sudden burst of speed, Josh feinted to the left, then spun to the right, his blade slicing through the air. Kral barely managed to block the strike, but the force of it sent him stumbling back. Josh pressed the advantage, his strikes coming faster and harder, forcing Kral to retreat. But just as Josh was about to deliver the final blow, a voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Enough!" Josh froze, his blade inches from Kral's throat. He turned to see the Chandur standing at the edge of the street, his feline eyes blazing with anger. "This ends now," the Chandur said, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. Kral snarled, his mandibles clicking furiously. "This is none of your concern, Chandur." "It is my concern when you threaten my friend," the Chandur replied, his tone icy. "Leave now, Kral, or face the consequences." For a moment it seemed like Kral might attack again. But then, with a final, furious glare, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Josh lowered his blade, his chest heaving with exertion. "That was close," he said, his voice tinged with relief. The Chandur nodded, his expression grim. "Too close. Kral is dangerous, Josh. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." "I know," Josh replied, sheathing his blade. "But I can't let him undo everything we've worked for." The Chandur placed a hand on Josh's shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You're not alone in this, my friend. We'll face him together." Josh nodded, a sense of determination settling over him. The road ahead would be difficult, but he knew he couldn't back down. The future of their peoples depended on it. Josh and the Chandur stood in the quiet street, the tension still thick in the air after Kral's sudden retreat. The Chandur's ears twitched, his feline eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting the general to reappear at any moment. "We need to move," the Chandur said, his voice low. "Kral won't stay away for long, and he's not the only one who still clings to the old hatreds." Josh nodded, his mind racing. He had known that the peace they were building was fragile, but he hadn't expected it to be tested so soon, or so violently. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. The Chandur's gaze softened slightly. "We go to the one place where Kral and his followers won't dare follow us. The sanctuary." Josh raised an eyebrow. "The sanctuary? I thought that was just a myth." "It's real," the Chandur replied, his tone firm. "And it's the only place where we can gather our allies and plan our next move without fear of being hunted." Josh hesitated. The sanctuary was said to be a hidden refuge, a place where those who sought peace could gather without fear of persecution. But it was also said to be guarded by ancient secrets and powerful forces. "If it's real, why haven't you mentioned it before?" The Chundur's ears flattened slightly. Because it's not a place to be taken lightly. The sanctuary demands much from those who seek its protection. But now we have no choice. Josh took a deep breath, then nodded. Lead the way. The journey to the sanctuary was long and arduous. They traveled through dense forests, across treacherous mountains, and into the heart of a desert that seemed to stretch on forever. Along the way, they encountered remnants of the war, abandoned outposts, shattered vehicles, and the occasional patrol of Xantian soldiers who still clung to the old ways. Each time, they managed to avoid detection, but the constant threat of discovery weighed heavily on them. As they traveled, Josh and the Chandur spoke of the past, of the battles they had fought, the friends they had lost, and the fragile hope they now carried for the future. Josh learned more about the Chundur's clan, how they had been nearly wiped out in the final days of the war, and how the Chandur himself had been left for dead until Josh found him. "You saved my life," the Chandur said one night as they camped beneath the stars. "But more than that, you gave me a purpose. For that, I will always be grateful." Josh smiled faintly. "You've saved my life more times than I can count. We're even." The Chundur's ears twitched in amusement. "Perhaps. But this journey is far from over, and the challenges ahead will test us both." Finally, after weeks of travel, they reached the entrance to the sanctuary. It was hidden deep within a canyon, its entrance concealed by a massive stone door covered in ancient runes. The Chandur placed his hand on the door, and after a moment, it began to creak open, revealing a vast, glowing chamber filled with beings from countless races. Xantians, Chundurs, humans, and others Josh didn't even recognize. "This is the sanctuary," the Chandur said, his voice filled with reverence. "It's a place where the past is set aside and the future is forged." As they stepped inside, they were greeted by a tall, imposing figure. A Xantian with a regal bearing and eyes that seemed to see right through them. "Welcome, travelers," the figure said. "I am Elder Voss, keeper of the sanctuary. You have come seeking refuge, but know this. The sanctuary does not offer safety without sacrifice. What is it you seek?" Josh stepped forward, his voice steady. "We seek peace, not just for ourselves but for all our peoples. The war may be over, but its shadow still lingers. We want to end it, for good." Elder Voss studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you have come to the right place. But know this, the path to peace is fraught with danger, and not all who walk it will survive." Josh exchanged a glance with the Chandur, then nodded. "We understand." Over the next few weeks, Josh and the Chandur worked with the inhabitants of the sanctuary to prepare for the coming conflict. They trained, strategized, and forged alliances with beings who had once been their enemies. But even as they prepared, Josh couldn't shake the feeling that Kral was still out there, plotting his next move. That feeling was confirmed one night when a scout returned to the sanctuary with grim news. Kral had gathered an army of Xantian loyalists and was marching on the sanctuary, determined to destroy it and everyone inside. "We can't let him reach us," Josh said during a tense council meeting. "If he does, everything we've worked for will be lost." Elder Voss nodded. "Then we must meet him in battle. But this will not be a war of destruction, it will be a war of ideals. We must show Kral and his followers that there is another way." The battle was fierce and brutal. Josh and the Chandur fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized as they faced wave after wave of Xantian soldiers. But even as they fought, they tried to reach out to their enemies, offering them a chance to lay down their arms and join them. Some did. Others refused, their hatred too deeply ingrained to overcome. But as the battle raged on, it became clear that Kral's forces were beginning to falter. The sight of Xantians fighting alongside humans and Chundurs was too much for some of his soldiers to bear, and one by one, they began to desert. Finally, Josh and the Chandur confronted Kral himself. The general was wounded but still defiant, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think you've won?" Kral snarled. "You think this changes anything? The war will never be over." Josh stepped forward, his blade lowered. "It's over, Kral. The war ended a long time ago. It's time to let it go." For a moment it seemed like Kral might attack. But then, with a roar of frustration, he threw down his weapon and fell to his knees. "You've taken everything from me," he said, his voice breaking. "Everything?" Josh shook his head. "No, Krell. We've given you a chance to start over, to build something better. It's up to you to take it." In the days that followed, the survivors of the battle began to rebuild. Krell was taken into custody, not as a prisoner, but as a guest of the sanctuary, where he would be given the chance to heal and, perhaps, to change. Josh and the Chandur continued their work, traveling to other colonies and spreading the message of peace. It wasn't easy. There were still those who clung to the old hatreds, and the road ahead was long and uncertain. But for the first time in a long time there was hope. As they stood on a hill overlooking a newly rebuilt settlement, the Chandur turned to Josh. "You've done the impossible, my friend. You've brought us together." Josh smiled faintly. "We've done it together. And we'll keep doing it, for as long as it takes." The Chandur's ears twitched in amusement. "Then I suppose we'd better get to work." And with that, they set off into the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together.